Good morning, everyone. I'm Giles Boucher, the Claims and Risk Control Leader for Cross Insurance, and welcome to our latest installment in our risk management series. And today's topic is cyber risk and the remote workforce. As we're all settling into the new reality of office closures and remote work arrangements, we're discovering a whole new set of risk exposures faced by businesses as we figure out how to work productively away from the controls and safeguards of an office. In an office, we have security processes, tools set up to protect data, systems, employees, and customers. Now, with everyone working from home, we have a new and quickly evolving security threats that we never dreamed of before. Today's seminar is focused on understanding some of those new threats and discusses strategies to avoid falling victim to those threats. We'll go through the challenges presented by a remote workforce that involves cybercrime and identity theft. Most importantly, we want to provide you with some risk management strategies that avoid the disruption, expense, and pain that these things can cause. While there are insurance products available to address a loss from various cybercrimes and identity thefts, and by the way, you should consider buying those coverages, we feel strongly that proactively managing risk to avoid a loss is always the best practice. So just a reminder, we will share the presentation after today's call. And if you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please use the chat function and I'll pick those up and we can address the questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. And today joining me is our presenter, Nick Coveney. Nick is an account executive here at Cross and a former underwriter with AIG. Nick has been a student of cyber coverage for some time now and has been watching the developments in this arena carefully since the beginning of this pandemic event. I want to thank Nick for the research into this issue and for taking his time today to present to us on this timely and important topic. And with that, Nick, I will hand the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Giles, and thanks again for everyone for your time today, and we hope you find this informative. So without further ado, cybercrime, let's define it. What is it? So the definition is on the slide, but cybercrime applies to a general use of technology to commit a crime. So phones, computers, payment systems such as ATMs, they're all susceptible to cyber criminals. Some of the more commonly known types are computer viruses, which I'm sure everyone's aware of. This can be in the form of malware, which if you think of it as evil software. There's ransomware. So this is technology that'll freeze or lock down a system until the monetary ransom is paid. There's also denial of service attacks and so on. So how are these criminal weapons implemented? It's not like a criminal has to be in a close vicinity or even the same country as you. So these sophisticated hacking groups or individuals will utilize devices such as phishing emails, which we'll talk about later, or cyber stalking, which may be closely following social media channels to find out more about you. And then they'll reach you with their viruses, attach, and pull the data. Social engineering and skimming. These are two new concepts on the rise. Skimming is something where fraudsters actually take little bits and pieces of your credit card information. They'll install what's called a skimmer device on a brick and mortar location. So think of a gas station pump or an ATM. These might even be in the form of overlay touchpads. So you type in your PIN and they're recording all that activity. And they can sell it to the black market. They can utilize it against you, your business, and so forth. So, the end results can be quite devastating to companies and to individuals alike. Sensitive data such as financial information to clients and customers or the company itself are at the hands of these cyber criminals. Passwords which allow further access into these systems and bank statements are also jeopardized. And identity theft, which we will touch more on in the following slide, is the end result of a significant amount of this cybercrime. Companies can be potentially left with dysfunctional or destroyed data or computer systems. So for a restaurant, this could be losing the credit card information of hundreds of recent customers. For hotels, it could be passport information of your visitors. For hospitals, it can mean operations are halted until the system is unlocked or restored. So I'm sure everyone on the call can imagine the detrimental effects a cybercrime hack could have on their respective business. And one common theme that every business, despite the industry, will have in common is a reputational risk that is also a large exposure, right? If your system's broken into and that makes the news waves or people find out, people may not want to come and eat at your restaurant for fear of their information being taken. This could be a future business deal down the road that may not happen because they feel their data is unprotected. And Giles, can I just kick it back to you? I know you've seen some interesting claims in this space. If you could just share a couple just to, to give some color, please.
Yeah, I've got a couple of examples. I'll be real quick. The first one is on data breach and the cyber loss with regard to a small business that was using a third-party data management vendor. The vendor actually was hit with a ransomware threat and unfortunately rolled the dice and decided not to pay the ransom to the wrongdoers, to the bad player. And they were hit with a crypto locker virus that locked all the data and prevented the vendor from accessing this information, which meant our client and many other customers of this vendor were not able to get to their data. And it was everything. It was accounts payables, account receivables, scheduling, inventory, all of this, all their HR records, all locked and unavailable. And essentially the data was corrupted enough that it was lost. So the downtime and the interruption to their business from the lost sales and the pipeline disruption, it was a loss that came close to $200,000. And for a small business, this was devastating. This was something that potentially could put them out of business. Now, the good news is they had a cyber policy in place and they had a great contract in place with the vendor. So between insurance solutions and risk transfer, they were able to recover pretty much. There is still some disruption to their operation that we're calculating and working through, but for the most part, that was a devastating blow right at the busiest time of the year, and certainly something that was easily avoidable, but more and more common happening now. The other example I wanted to talk about real quickly, and this one is one of my favorites because it was a law firm that suffered a social engineering fraud. And social engineering fraud simply means, your email has been infiltrated. There's somebody that's lurking in the background that's watching this email traffic going back and forth between buyer and seller. And when the instructions come through to wire money to the seller, this is when the person that's lurking in the background essentially clones an email, sends it to the person that's buying. They think it's a legitimate email, but it has different wiring instructions usually. And the wire ends up going to another account, nothing associated with who's supposed to be buying and selling, and the money is lost. And this law firm thought they had everything locked down. They had a process in place where it was two people in the office literally sitting 20 feet apart from each other, and they were still fooled by this scheme to the tune of just over $100,000. And again, in this case, I mention it because there is kind of a good ending to the story. They did have the social engineering coverage on their crime policy, and that policy ended up paying, but the limit was only $100,000. So anything above that was not recovered, and it was a lesson learned. So these things happen. They can happen to anybody, and they can happen to in anywhere. The thing that I learned from the law firm example is their perception was the two people involved with the transaction were literally in the same office 20 feet apart, and the emails they perceived the emails to be only going 20 feet, when in reality, emails travel all over the world. They're bouncing off satellites, they're going through cables, they're all over the place. And at any point in that transaction, in that stream of the email, it can be picked up by someone looking to infiltrate your email system. So it's not just a closed loop. It's, if you're sending emails, they go everywhere and anywhere before they get to the person that's just a few feet away from you. So just a couple of quick examples, Nick, to illustrate what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And we hope this presentation will help, everyone on the call to avoid these. Like Giles mentioned, an insurance policy, a cyber insurance policy is a great option, but we realize not everyone has that. And there are some quick fixes that you can implement even today to help protect your business. So that's what we'll touch on going forward. So identity theft, as mentioned in the previous slide, it's the culmination of a lot of cybercrime ends up into identity theft for individuals within an organization or those who do business with that organization. And I wanted just to take a minute and dedicate a slide to this, because while most of this presentation is about what the business can do to protect itself, I want to emphasize the duty of care a business has as well. So we all know a safe workplace is part of the employee-employer agreement, right? This is often thought of as physical precautions, making sure there are no unsafe working conditions on a factory floor, making sure a brewery's operation has all the necessary safety gear in case of a fire or an explosion of a vat. However, in the age of technology, keeping employees safe also means protecting their identity, keeping their records safe from harm. So a hack can steal a customer's financial data, and that could lead to identity theft, yes. But your employees, through the hiring process, and if they're enrolled in benefits and so much more, have a ton of personal data encased within your business. And the facts above just show how prone the US is to identity theft in particular. So as we proceed through the presentation, please keep in mind that while we're talking about mitigating cybercrime, as firms utilize a remote workforce, we want to protect the business, customers, and the employees as best we can. So the next slide has the 2018 identity theft fraud reports. So this is an interesting visualization of the spread of identity theft. And just keep in mind, these are fraud reports. Every report may have 100,000 records. You can just think of the astronomical numbers we're talking about here. On credit card debt, that's about 35%. That's where we see a lot. But again, this is 2018 on the slide. And I'm sure over the past couple of years, a lot of folks have switched to credit cards that have chips in them. So that's a direct effect of the banking companies responding to this statistic above. So while credit card identity fraud might be reducing in 2020 and beyond, it might not be that 35% anymore. It's all the more reason to be focused on how the other cybercrime will fill that gap for the criminals. Some memorable identity theft catastrophes to date. I'm sure we all remember in 2018, Marriott, 500 million records jeopardized. The year before that, Equifax had 143 million. And nothing to date, and hopefully ever will beat Yahoo in 2013. 3 billion consumers had their records stolen, and that's still the largest. So now that we've covered cybercrime and the potential losses that victims may be exposed to, I want to discuss how these risks may be amplified for a remote workplace setting. So as we know, with the government and the CDC guidelines, going into the office was not a reality for many of us in the recent months. So this forced an immense amount of companies to utilize a remote workforce strategy, whether they wanted to or not. So meetings are done virtually through various platforms. Listed at the bottom of the slide are just a few of the popular tools you may be aware of. Zoom, for one, is a great example. I mean, we're on it right now. And there are potential errors as firms learn to utilize new technology in rapid time. And these are targeted by more hacking outfits since more users are now available on a single platform. So as businesses struggle to find out how to utilize these technologies, the technology companies are struggling to keep up with the usage as well. And these tech firms didn't anticipate such a drastic increase in users of the technology. So Zoom, for an example, had 10 million users earlier this year in 2020, and essentially overnight increased to 200 million. That's a challenge for any business to do successfully and without issue. Eric Yuan, the CEO of Zoom, was quoted saying, "We did not design the product with the foresight that in a matter of weeks, every person in the world would suddenly be working, studying, and socializing from home. We now have a much broader set of users who are utilizing our product in a myriad of unexpected ways, presenting us with challenges we did not anticipate when the platform was conceived." You may have heard of Zoom bombing. There's been news reports on this. This is one of the issues that we're finding in this increased usage. And this is when unwanted users will join a private Zoom meeting. They can yell profanities, present inappropriate content, We don't have to go into the details. I'm sure everyone's got a great imagination, but I'm sure we can also all understand the potential detriments this can have to an ongoing business meeting. What happened was savvy hackers in early April of 2020 utilized this tool called war dialing. They created it just a month ago, and basically it scans Zoom meetings across the globe and finds where passwords are not required. It then has the meeting IDs and allows them to jump in. Another issue we're seeing is when folks take screenshots and post them on LinkedIn or other social media outlets to show how they're working virtually. You know, quite honestly, we never took pictures in conference rooms before. It's probably not appropriate to do that now. And as you'll see on the slide, this is a great example. This is the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in his parliament. This is a picture that was on the front of the London newspaper. And as you can see in the top left, the Zoom meeting ID is right there. So if you are taking pictures, if they are going out to social media, make sure you're looking at everything within that picture and there's no information that's being passed on.
This is a great example. I mean, everybody, I'm sure, has got a smirk on their face because this is the funniest thing. I guess that Zoom ID is going to be discontinued, right?
I would hope so. I'm guessing there's some pretty secretive and sensitive data being discussed at that meeting. So let's hope. So on the next slide is just some of the best practices with Zoom. But they're really just rules of engagement. You know, you may not be using Zoom, you may have Skype, GoToMeeting, some other collaborative tool. But a lot of these rules will apply for whatever you use. They're pretty self-explanatory. As Giles said, we're going to send out the slides and the checklist after, so no need to write them down. And then on a funny point, in all honesty, we did not use a password for this meeting today. So let's cross our fingers that we don't get Zoom bombed ourselves, and going forward, I know we'll be utilizing passwords as well.
All right, we're learning as we're going, right? This is an evolving situation, so I feel embarrassed that I don't have a password on this call. So that one's on me.
So how do hackers get into our systems? They log in. So this is a great quote by the Chief Information Security Officer at Microsoft. Now, there's a variety of ways to get into a company's system, but phishing remains at the top of the list to gain access. So these are emails or links that, when opened or clicked, download the virus or bug into your system, and then it can extract data back to the hacker. If you click one of these emails, just think of it as leaving the door open to your house of information. The issue is a lot of these emails mimic similar systems, like Microsoft Office 365, or even an email from a contact at your company. There are even phishing scams targeted towards, the increased Zoom usage, as we talked about. Some of them even represent COVID-19 charities and medical supplies, which is just disgusting to hear, but it's true and it's out there. So on the next slide, here's some examples of recent phishing examples that have popped up. As you can see, they look similar to the common links and emails. Now, if you look at the one at the bottom, Microsoft 365, you can see the link at the top seems a little bit foolish, happymachine@.info. So, be on the lookout for things like that. Watch out for emails from unknown senders. Anything that's offering a special deal or discount. One rule of thumb, not just for this, but in general, if a link or email seems too good to be true, it probably is. So don't fall for the bait, don't feed the fish, and don't click anything suspicious.
Yeah, Nick, I would just jump in here and say this is something that you need to consistently reinforce with the employees that are working remotely. Being around the office, you can get that certain interaction and communication going with colleagues that are in the next office or the next workstation over from you. But when you're working from home, you're isolated. You don't necessarily hear that same banter going back and forth, or a discussion, or overhear something about a phishing email that might be coming out that day. So just remind employees, and maybe set up something internally where you're testing employees from time to time with your IT folks. So it's harmless if they click on it, but it allows you to test what is the response and reaction of employees that are getting these phishing emails. So it's something to keep an eye on. It certainly is it's a vulnerability with a remote workforce that is very hard and probably requires additional steps to protect and safeguard and train.
So now, how can we protect ourselves? So the next few slides are going to talk about some easy fixes that you as a company or business can implement and drastically reduce your exposure to cyber criminals. So number one is phishing awareness. Training is huge, and criminals change the way they fish. So think of it as they literally change the bait on their hook. With COVID, we're seeing a whole new stream of scams. So simulations and trainings help to coach your employees on how to spot these emails. Antivirus software is another great tool to have, which will stop scams from crossing into your domain as well. Some key things to be on the lookout for. As I said before, links with suspicious emails, unknown attachments, misspelled email addresses or titles, and beware of lookalike domains. Anything with just a letter off or a little misspelling, that's typically a red flag. A good trick is to hover over a link before you click it if you find it suspicious, and that will show its full address without you having to click it. Number two is multi-factor authentication. So this is using multiple login passwords to gain access into a single system. So while it's slightly more inconvenient, it pays dividends by protecting your data in the long run. Google confirmed 100% of automated bot attacks were blocked by MFA. Microsoft says 99.9%. So the point is, MFA greatly reduces the chances of a cyber criminal gaining access through one of their basic hacks. And I just want to reiterate, this is the most important takeaway of the presentation. If you don't remember anything else at all from the presentation, please remember this one slide, MFA. It's easy to implement into your business for little to no cost. It's significant defense. You can do everything right with technology. You can install firewalls. You can utilize cybersecurity firms. But if someone can figure out a password, they're able to bypass all of that and get right into your system. Number three, a virtual private network. The picture does a great job on defining how the VPN works. And when you have employees now working remotely, there are other Wi-Fi networks that allow cyber criminals to access and go into your company's data from there. So as an example, if we're just using round numbers, if you have 100 employees now working remotely, there's at least 100 more access points for a cyber criminal to enter your business. So a VPN sets up a barrier gate or firewall which protects the business from hackers entering through these other networks. It can also whitelist IP addresses, block unknown users, and things of that nature. A shocking stat from a semantic study shows that 75% of consumers do not utilize a VPN currently. And cyber risk mitigation, number four. Now these are some basic ones, but we thought they'd be worth mentioning. So redefine your work protocols. Employees are working from home in different settings. It could be a private office, it could be a kitchen table. Other family members or roommates are close by. Make sure to reiterate with employees what information needs to be private. A clean desk policy helps provide guidance on what is acceptable and what is not. Screen awareness is another new concept for those who no longer have an office or cubicle. Have employees lock their screens when not in use. And also screen protectors are a great low-cost option for those without a private space in their home to protect the information. And carrying on, if you want to monitor your computer or tablet, that's for work, but it's at home now, right? So for example, if little Bobby or Susie wants to watch YouTube on your laptop at night, probably not a great idea. Is a 6 or 7-year-old going to understand what a phishing link is? Probably not. And they're probably going to be more apt to click on things that they're not supposed to. And if you must, at least use a different logon for sharing with your family. That at least provides another line of security between your business and your family. Smart devices is one we bring up because it's almost a commonality in the home at this point. Amazon's Echo, OK Google, and so on. Well, they record automatically when a wake word is used. And sometimes they'll record automatically if it sounds like the wake word. And I know the earlier versions of a lot of these pieces of equipment would be recording automatically, and you'd have to go into settings to change the recording preferences. So it's probably safer just to have this device in another room, or just assume that it may be recording. You know, a couple of years ago, there was a Bloomberg study where it showed Amazon employees were listening to recordings unbeknownst to the owners to train Amazon's artificial intelligence. So it's out there, just be aware. And so to wrap up, you know, here's a checklist of everything we discussed. Again, we're going to send a copy, so no need to write any of this down, but just as a quick refresher, you know, education, all it takes is one employee to open a bad link to begin the domino effect on the rest of the business. One bad link opens the gates to the cyber criminals and then possibly the rest of the organization. So constant phishing exercises and simulations will help employees spot these emails or links. A solid antivirus software is always a forceful deterrent to cybercrime as well. McAfee, Norton, those are just a few of the household names for this, and they have low-cost options for businesses. You know, multi-factor authentication, probably the most crucial, as I said before. Again, 99% of firms utilize MFA to enter a system, and they'll block the initial hacks. Cyber criminals want to grab that low-hanging fruit first. So there are many firms still that only have a single password logon. So that's a much easier target for them. So make your business difficult to hack. A VPN or virtual private network, another great tool to implement into your business, especially if you have a remote workforce these days. You know, individuals typically have vulnerable Wi-Fi connections if they're working from home, and it provides that other entry level into your business data. So it's best to put up a firewall if you can. Again, there are great low-cost options out there. One thing we didn't touch on, but I want to bring up quickly, is an inventory of equipment. You know, the crisis forced everyone to scramble into a remote workforce environment. So laptops, monitors, hard drives, what have you, were sent out to employees to prop up the business. It's a good idea to keep track of these pieces of equipment. Down the road, you don't want a laptop with sensitive information falling into the wrong hands, especially if that employee is no longer with the company. And finally, just remember to reestablish the same protocols you have in the office with your employees in their remote spaces. Now, while you may not be able to keep them out of pajamas while working from home, reminding them to keep sensitive data hidden will help to secure this information from falling into the wrong hands. And keep in mind, you know, a cyber insurance policy typically includes much of everything we discussed and more. So if you have a cyber insurance policy, make sure you understand what coverages are there, because you're paying the premium, you want to utilize the resources that you have. And if you don't have a cyber insurance policy, please reach out to me or your cross contact, and we can help customize one that fits your specific business needs. But again, even without a cyber insurance policy, the above checklist will help to implement some risk mitigation strategy into your business right now at little to no cost.
Always better to avoid a loss than have to fight through a claim process.
Yes. And finally, I just want to wrap up with just a thought. You know, working remote is kind of here, whether we like it or not, and to some extent, it'll probably be here for the foreseeable future. You know, we're in changing times, and how business is conducted, it's really due to this coronavirus that we're finding ourselves in. But however, a silver lining in everything is that many businesses I have spoken to are finding that some of the myths about a lapse in productivity from a remote workforce seem to be false. These companies are impressed with the resilience of their employees, and their productivity has increased. So I think many workers find it appealing to determine the hours which they're most productive, and not having a tough commute in the recent weeks is probably a pretty nice thing as well. So in the future, firms are going to have to need to adapt to what the employees are looking for with that work-life balance. And remote working seems to be that balance in many cases, even if it's a day or two a week. Therefore, it's imperative to make sure you're protecting your business from cyber criminals who will continue to look for ways to steal your data and hack into your system. So thank you again, everyone, for joining today. I hope you found this helpful, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me, your relationship within Cross, for more information on how we can help you in your business in these times. And now I'll kick it back to Giles for any questions that may be in the queue.
I'll remind anybody, if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat function and send them on in. Nick, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. One is regarding fishing simulation and training and what might be available around that. Are there options out there for training or simulations for little or no cost, perhaps from carriers?
Yes, yep. There's a few of them out there, good options. One is called InfoSec, INFOSEC. Another one's called Lucy, like the name, LUCY. And then the other one is GoFish, GOPHISH. And we'll send that in the email as well. But these are great, what they call freeware, where you can go in and do some basic training for your company. They have other options where you can, choose to pay a little bit more and get a bit more coverage. But really just some basic training is helpful, and it's free and it's out there. So we'll make sure to include that in the email.
Great. Now, one other question, and this one, you mentioned multi-factor authentication is the most important takeaway from today's presentation. How does a firm implement this?
No, that's a great question. I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but Microsoft 365 and Google, they all have free options to implement that. So go into the settings, go into preferences, and you can add that extra layer. Another one it costs a little bit of money, but RSA token is fabulous, and what that'll do is send you a different combination number that updates every 10 seconds or so. A stronger line of defense. But like I said, Google, Microsoft 365, it's free to implement right now if you utilize those systems.
Awesome. Well, that looks like all the questions. So thank you, Nick. Thank you for all of this presentation, the material, the content was fantastic, and I hope we were able to share with the audience some best practices around loss avoidance, some awareness around these risks. It's a very fast changing environment that we're in now with remote workforces. And as Nick said, this is something that we just have to accept as the new norm, and it's going to be in place for the foreseeable future. So building our best practices around risk control and risk management of these issues is certainly going to be important. So with that, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you again, Nick, for the presentation. And if you have any questions, please get a hold of us. Otherwise, we will share the presentation with everybody, and I hope everyone has a safe and good day. Thank you.
Thanks.